You know how many smartphones these days just kind of feel the same? I only made a video about this on the subject the other day. There are several different theories, but one is that here in the West, we just don't have the same level of diversity or spread of features and design that we did way back when. You could pick between Apple, Google, Samsung, OnePlus, Sony, LG, BlackBerry and so on, and these days it's pretty much just the Samsung and Apple show with Google showing up for the right people. I genuinely believe that the minute we lost LG, we lost a big player and one that gave us so many features that we still use today. Phones that stand the test of time, and we lost a lot of that momentum and progress that we all adored in the late 2010s. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and I, like many of you, have been a smartphone enthusiast for many years, over a decade now. And in that time, I've seen trends come and go, big launches disrupt the space, and some truly wacky software and hardware. But I think that LG's mobile division really stood for something and provided the counterculture tech that many really enjoyed, but that also provided meaningfully different features for people whose needs detached from the mainstream. Stuff that didn't follow the status quo and dared to be different, dared to innovate, which would ultimately come back to bite them, and that's quite poetic. I don't know about you, but I loved the rear-facing lock and volume buttons. It wasn't like they were necessarily better or easier to use, but they were just different, and I know people who were horrified to have to move away from that layout in the later LG phones, and then of course when LG stopped making phones and they were forced to move to a different smartphone maker. The innovative additional displays like what we had on the LG V10 and V20 were pretty cool, but I can also see why these were canned. They were just not that convenient, which is a bit of a shame because they do look kind of cool. Of course, LG was responsible for introducing the world to the super popular and versatile triple camera array, comprised of a main, an ultra-wide and a telephoto camera. I actually called this way back in 2018 the most important phone, the LG V40. Because the triple cameras were what we'd gone to see in flagship phones pretty much everywhere. Of course, we now have the way bigger sensors, the lenses, not to speak of the incredibly complex periscope telephoto lenses that we have now. But the concept of having 3 focal lengths on the back of your smartphone all at the same time, that all started with LG. And how could we forget that LG also popularized having an ultra-wide camera on the back of your phone? If you love the extra field of view or wacky perspective provided by the ultra-wide camera setup, then you have LG to thank for that. I was so excited about the LG G6 way back when because it had that shiny new look, the gorgeous display, but it also had an ultra-wide camera, which is something I'd wanted in a smartphone for years at this point, as Apple, Google, Samsung, they all took way far longer to implement this feature in particular. LG also kept going with the headphone port after many manufacturers ditched it in favour of dongles and wireless earphones. And not only this, but some of the ports they put on their smartphones were the best you could get. Like, not just another 3.5mm port, with high performance quad DACs and heaps of ways to customise the sound just how you want it. This is why there's still a massive cult following for LG smartphones, because people don't just want a headphone port. There are many who still want a high quality option that can allow them to carry around a FLAC library and listen with expensive or rare headphones or IEMs, and that's what LG did famously with the V30 model. It's also worth mentioning that Sony is still doing this, so it's nice that there's still an option on the market, but LG's was almost held in a higher regard at the time. There were some absolutely bonkers releases over the years with the likes of the LG Wing. This thing was so cool with a swing out second display that ultimately had your phone T-posing at you the entire time you used it. Sure, it made no sense and no one actually bought one, but it was a phone that actually stood out from a sea of sameness, breaking the monotonous trends that have almost plagued smartphones since. But it also had a mid-range chipset and was actually quite expensive. It was a mind-boggling release, the LG Wing. And the Velvet was a mid-ranger with a flagship level physical outer hardware that just never really paid off. It was an odd value proposition in hindsight, and I can certainly see why it didn't take off. It never really knew if it wanted to be a hyper-premium smartphone or a more budget-conscious one. I could see what LG was sort of trying to go for here because mid-range smartphones at the time were renowned for their poor build quality, so having something that felt nicer at a more affordable price would have made sense, but it just did not translate to reality. The LG G5's ultra-wide camera wasn't its only cool trait. Of course, it had the removable battery and bottom chassis cover, which you could swap out for different models too. This was at a time when smartphones were starting to lose the removable backs and batteries, and gave us something that mirrored those great features, not just another sealed up phone. Sure, it ultimately wasn't the best system in the world, but it was interesting and it was useful. The thing is, the majority of smartphone buyers want phones because they follow the trends. An incredibly small group of us are actually enthusiasts. The rest want similar looking and feeling devices with a standard set of features, software that just works, all wrapped up in a package that is reliable and familiar feeling. Since what LG was doing was pretty big departure from this, it makes sense why a lot of its models just didn't sell heaps, and actually why those models were bought by enthusiasts. And ultimately, why its division was forced to shut up shop. For those of you who have been around a while, you'll know that LG's reputation was never really dazzling. There were some serious concerns with long-term software support, even in a time when 7 years wasn't the norm. There were delayed updates, phones that rarely, if ever, got updates, and the general sentiment behind LG UX was that it was fairly cumbersome and clunky compared to other options. And the infamous and notorious boot looping issues that plagues pretty much every model to a greater or lesser extent, put many people off for life. This was not exclusive to LG phones, to be fair, but with the sheer number of its devices that suffered from this issue, it was hard to ignore it, and certainly didn't help the company's already quite rocky reputation. But by and large, I believe LG Mobile did some much needed good for the industry and helped inspire other companies to implement interesting but also valuable features, such as the triple camera, the ultra-wide lens, perhaps even the quad DAC in some obscure models. I love what LG brought, and I hope to see them return once again in the near future. Maybe we'll see an enthusiast level device with a great headphone port and microSD expansion, but with many more up-to-date cameras and displays, of course, performance specifications. Maybe some better software support too. Or maybe we won't, and maybe the LG Mobile division will become a relic of a bygone era. If you're a big LG fan, please do let me know your stories in the comments. Which models did you own? I had the G2 all the way through the G7, and I also had the V30. I think that one in particular was probably my favorite, especially the gorgeous quad DAC and the great ultra-wide lens. I also think it did that era, that design better than Samsung did with the Galaxy S8 and S9, but you can debate that in the comments. Also, the G3 was one of the first phones I ever reviewed, so that holds a special place in my heart for sure. I know people love the V series, so do let me know what you think of LG in the comments, and would you like to see them come back? Anyway, while you're down there in the comments, be sure to hit like if you enjoyed today's content, and subscribe of course to never miss another upload. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I will catch you later. Cheers.